I'm John Batchelor, Malcolm Holnine, Conference of Presidents. Turkey. The Turkish-Syrian border is dangerous. The refugees, the ongoing Syrian conflict, especially Aleppo province, abutting the Turkish frontier. The conflict there involves all the players. I mean, the Islamic State, the Caliphate, and its kindred of Cain, al-Nusra and its kindred of Cain. Certainly what is left of the Free Syrian Army, unclear, an aggregation. And now the Russian forces, joined by, we're told, the IRGC on the ground, Hezbollah on the ground, even rumors of as far afield as North Korea and China, and Cuba and China. So we put all this together and we welcome Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Vice President for Research. Turkey and Moscow. Moscow, the new big player in the theater, Jonathan. What does Moscow want from Ankara? What does Ankara want from Moscow? Can you help us? Good evening to you.
Good evening. Well, I think that Turkey would like it if Russia would just simply go away. Turkey had been playing a rather dangerous game, but it appeared that it was working, and that is, it was opening up its border and allowing for this a group of jihadis, hundreds, thousands of jihadis to come across the border, and they were taking their toll on the Assad regime. And it looked not as if Assad was going to fall any day, but certainly Assad was confined. He was retreating back to what we now call Alawistan, this Alawi area on the western side of Syria along the Mediterranean. And so the Turks were thinking that, yes, it was a gamble and it was dangerous, but certainly it was paying off over time, and that Assad was going to fall. Then, of course, Russia came in. It is now propping up Assad. Assad is now on the march with Russian jets providing air cover as they go and conquer new territory. In terms of the Russians, it's a bit more complicated. The Russians were looking to the Turks for a gas pipeline. And this was going to help them essentially put the Europeans out of business on some level, that they were really going to corner the energy market. Now that's going to be off the table right now. In the meantime, the Russians have been locking on to Turkish jets, radar lock, so making it very clear that they see the Turks as enemies in this hostile environment over Syria. And the Turks have gone running to NATO, asking for their protection. And so now all of a sudden we have the potential for an international conflict on this border.
So just a footnote on this, about what the implications are for the November elections in Turkey.
Well, as you know, the last elections didn't provide conclusive results, and so the Turks are going back again in early November. There's a lot of talk about how Erdogan has perpetuated conflict, trying to bring the nationalists and right-of-center Turks back into his camp, those that he may have lost in the last go-around. I don't see that working for him. In fact, I think that the average Turk is now looking at Erdogan, looking at the situation that Turkey is in, and seeing that that things are worse for the Turks than they were before, that economically things are more questionable, and so it's quite likely that we're going to see another hung election where you don't have a clear winner, and they may need to go back to snap elections a few months after that again, and this could go on for quite some time.
The suicide bomb, the attack on the protests associated with the Kurds, the investigation launched. Is the MIT investigating the MIT because it can't find who did the crime?
Well, I mean, it's Turkey, and so you're always going to see these conspiracy theories flying. All indications point to this being ISIS, that of course that this was a Kurdish and opposition rally, so it makes very little sense that the PKK would be involved. However, what we have seen is that the police was just nowhere to be found on that day. And why it was that the police decided not to be there, very close to an intelligence services building, close to an underground metro stop, close to a police station. The fact that there were no police there have a lot of Turks questioning who was behind this And in fact, some are pointing the finger at the MIT, the Turkish intelligence services, saying that perhaps they had some hand in this because the AKP is trying to weaken the Kurdish vote, trying to get them to be afraid to come out to vote in early November. Now, again, all of this is conspiracy theory, but there are little kernels of truth to this that even very level-headed Turks are pointing to, saying, look, not all of this adds up. So we're waiting to get some results from this investigation.
Could you comment on the Russian involvement in Syria vis-a-vis Israel and Israel's need to be able to respond to the movement of arms to Hezbollah, and the reports today that they have succeeded in setting up a hotline between Russia and Israel, which they were not able to do with the Americans, between Russia and America on the same basis?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, look, the Russian presence there it poses a great danger to Israel. That Israel, of course, wants to be able to take out Hezbollah weapons, which they have been doing with impunity for the last 3 or 4 years. With Russian personnel on the ground, Russian advisors operating surface-to-air missiles, Russian personnel potentially even transferring some of these weapons. Just imagine what happens if Israel kills one Russian personnel. Just imagine the kind of international incident that might take place. And so the Israelis are undoubtedly feeling constrained, wondering whether they can continue to operate from the air the way that they have been. Now, this idea that there could be a hotline or a red phone between the Russians and the Israelis, look, it sounds nice on paper, but just let's not forget for a minute here that Russia is there to protect the Assad regime, and Hezbollah is an ally of Assad. And so if the Israelis are going after these weapons and they ask the Russians in advance for permission to strike these targets, do we have any guarantees that Russia is not going to pass this on to the Syrians and to Hezbollah and ultimately thwart Israeli designs?
There are reports that the IRGC is on the ground in number in Aleppo province. We know that there was a major Iranian general in some fashion killed. We do not have confirmation of how. We can guess it was by Al-Qaeda or ISIS, some fashion of jihadists. Have the Russians given the IRGC a morale boost? Is it more aggressive now than it was before, especially Aleppo province?
Look, I think that in general, the Russians have given a shot in the arm to everyone who is fighting in the region on the part of the Iranian axis. I think that's undeniable at this point. That you're now seeing more bold movements on the part of the Iranians, the Russians, the Syrians, Hezbollah. Everybody seems to be operating and sort of operating on all cylinders. I think that what we're looking at right now is ultimately whether the IRGC and Hezbollah can go home, and that's the thing that we worry about long term. I mean, imagine right now if Hezbollah can go home. They right now have 8,000 fighters in Syria. They've lost 1,300, but when those 6,700 go home, they will be battle hardened. They will have experience in the battlefield that Hezbollah has never really had before, and they're going to be looking for new enemies. And of course, we know why Hezbollah exists.
Won't they also be exhausted? Won't they also be exhausted?
Look, I mean, I think that they might wait a couple of months before they think about their next front. But these are men of war, and they will certainly be looking to apply the new skills that they've learned in Syria and other places. And so there is reason to be concerned if you're an Israeli war planner.
But that is a longer term. There's no prospect of them pulling out anytime soon, I think, given the situation. But what about the anti-Russian activities? Do you see the Saudis actually backing jihadi forces? Do you see them activating Chechen forces against Russia?
Look, I think that there's a very high likelihood of that. You have to remember what the Saudis did to the Russians in the 1980s, how they were really the major players in mobilizing the Mujahideen that ultimately killed more than 14,000 Russian soldiers in Afghanistan and drove them from the region. There is a long-standing hatred between these countries, and of course the Saudis have been at the forefront of calling for Assad to go. Now the Russians have stepped in and they're saving Assad's hide. And so the Saudis have made it very clear they're not happy about this. There have been clerics that have come out and have called this a holy war. In fact, the Russian church has come out and said that this is a holy war as well. So it looks like there are now some new religious dimensions to this and old political grudge matches that could be reignited. And so we have warned, I wrote a piece recently in the National Interest, noting that this really could be a reigniting of a war that we thought ended in 1989, but we may see it resurrect.
The word proxy, as in proxy war, was used in a headline of the New York Times, pointing to a battlefield of the new Cold War between Moscow and Washington. Do you accept the metaphor, Jonathan?
I don't, because I don't think that the United States has skin in the game. I think the Russians do. They are, and by the way, I mean, they're not exactly fighting by proxy. I mean, they're on the ground and providing direct assistance. But when you look at what the United States has on the ground, it really has very little. You know, you have these, 9 individuals that we've trained and spent $50 million training them. These are not our proxies. These are people that we have decided to train because it looks as if we have to the rest of the world. But I think Putin has called Obama's bluff. He realized that Obama was really not committed to trying to salvage Syria, and he realized that he could go in and take this as a new sphere of influence, and he's doing it with his own people on the ground. It's not a proxy war.
Final trick question, Mr. Schanzer. Are we or our allies or the Saudi truck that just drove by going to drop man pads into Syria?
Well, this is exactly what happened during the Mujahideen era. We know that there are some already in the theater, or at least we hear that there may be. This is exactly the kind of thing that you would look for to be a game changer that could spill a lot of Russian blood in Syria. But also remember that any time you arm up these people, these irregular jihadi forces, you don't know where it ends up. It could get much uglier for all of us in the region if you start arming the wrong people.
Jonathan Schanzer, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. A man-pad, that's a short way of saying a shoulder-fired ground-wear missile. Russian jets, Russian helicopters, captives, ISIS.
American planes.
I'm John Batchelor.